She wrote to him for 43 years, every Sunday morning without fail. Her handwriting grew shakier with age, but her love never wavered. The mailbox at the end of her gravel driveway swallowed each letter like a prayer offered to an empty sky. He never answered, not once. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, when the maple leaves had turned the color of old rust and forgotten dreams, a knock came at her door. A stranger stood on her porch, holding a weathered wooden box. Inside were hundreds of letters, all in her handwriting, all bearing her return address. Letters she had sent to a ghost for nearly half a century. This is the story of Clara Whitmore and the love that refused to die. Clara had been 22 when the world stopped making sense. It was 1969, and the television in her childhood home flickered with images of a war that felt both distant and devastatingly close. Her fiancé, Michael Torres, had been deployed to Vietnam 3 months after he'd slipped a simple gold band onto her finger beneath the old oak tree behind her family's farmhouse. "I'll write you every day," he had whispered against her ear, his breath warm in the cool September air. "And when I come home, we'll build our life right here. White house, red shutters, children playing in that field where we carved our names." She believed him then, believed in forever, believed in promises made under star-drunk skies and sealed with kisses that tasted like hope and youth, and all the tomorrows they thought they owned. The farmhouse where Clara had grown up sat on 40 acres of rolling Iowa countryside, surrounded by cornfields that stretched to the horizon like a green ocean. Her bedroom window faced east, toward the sunrise, toward the direction Michael had gone when the military transport took him away. Every morning she would wake and look out that window, imagining she could see all the way to the jungle where he slept under foreign stars. For the first 6 months, his letters arrived like clockwork. Every Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, the mailman would leave her pieces of Michael's heart folded into military-issued envelopes. His handwriting was careful, deliberate, each word chosen to comfort her across the impossible distance. Clara would recognize his letters from 50 feet away, the way his name was written in the corner, the slight slant of his script that leaned forward like it was reaching for home. "The sunsets here remind me of your hair," he wrote in February. "Golden and wild and beautiful. I carry your photograph everywhere, and the other soldiers tease me because I kiss it goodnight." She kept every letter in a shoebox beneath her bed, reading them until the paper grew soft and the ink began to fade. The shoebox had once held her wedding shoes, white satin pumps with pearl buttons that she had never worn down the aisle. Now it held something more precious than any shoe could ever be, proof that love could travel halfway around the world and still arrive intact. She would read his letters by lamplight after her parents had gone to sleep, tracing his words with her fingertip as if she could touch him through the ink. "The sunsets here remind me of your hair," he wrote in February. "Golden and wild and beautiful. I carry your photograph everywhere, and the other soldiers tease me because I kiss it goodnight." She memorized every sentence, every comma, every small smudge where his hand had rested on the paper. She wrote back religiously, telling him about the changing seasons in Iowa, about how the corn grew tall and green in summer, about the way the snow fell silent and deep in winter, blanketing their secret places in pristine white. She wrote about their future, about the house they would build where her grandmother's roses used to grow, about the children they would name after the constellations he had taught her to find in the Iowa sky. She wrote about missing him with an ache that lived in her bones, about counting days like rosary beads, about how his absence had become a presence all its own. Then the letters stopped coming. March 17th, 1970. The last letter she ever received from Michael Torres arrived on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, until it became the Tuesday that divided her life into before and after. He wrote about monsoon rains and missing her laugh. He wrote about dreams of home. The letter ended with words that would echo in her heart for decades. "Wait for me, Clara. No matter what happens, wait for me." 2 weeks later, the telegram arrived. "Missing in action. Presumed dead." Those 3 words rearranged her entire universe, turned her inside out, made her question everything she had ever believed about God and fairness and the way the world was supposed to work. The telegram was delivered by young Billy Patterson, who had gone to school with Clara and Michael, who had thrown rice at other couples' weddings while Clara waited for her own. Billy's hands shook as he handed her the yellow paper, and she could see in his eyes that he already knew what it said. The whole town would know by evening. She would become poor Clara, the girl who lost her soldier, the one who everyone would whisper about in grocery store aisles and church pews. But Clara Whitmore had never been a woman who accepted presumptions, especially when they came from the government that had taken the man she loved and lost him somewhere in a jungle whose name she couldn't even pronounce correctly. She continued writing. Every Sunday morning, she would sit at the kitchen table that had belonged to her grandmother, pull out her best stationery, and pour her heart onto paper. The ritual became sacred. She would wake before dawn, make coffee in the same blue ceramic mug that Michael had given her for her 21st birthday, and watch the sun rise over the cornfields while she composed her weekly letter. The kitchen held memories in every corner. The windowsill where Michael had carved their initials while waiting for Sunday dinner. The chair where he had sat, polishing his boots and talking about their future. The telephone on the wall where she had received that last call from him, crackling with static and distance, before he disappeared into the silence that swallowed Soldier's whole. She wrote about her days, about the seasons that changed without him, about the loneliness that settled into her bones like winter frost that never quite thawed. She wrote about hope, about faith, about the stubborn belief that somewhere, somehow, he was still listening. She wrote about the dreams where he came home, where she heard his truck in the driveway and ran barefoot across the yard to meet him. She wrote about waking from those dreams, about the moment when memory returned and broke her heart all over again. The townspeople thought she had lost her mind. Her own family worried, then grew frustrated, then finally grew quiet about it altogether. Her mother would find excuses to visit on Sunday afternoons, arriving after Clara had walked to the mailbox, hoping to catch her daughter in a moment of clarity, a moment of letting go. Her father would repair things around the farmhouse without being asked, fixing the shutters and mending the fence, as if he could somehow fix his daughter's broken heart through carpentry and devotion. Friends married, had children, moved away to cities with names Clara had never heard of. They sent Christmas cards at first, then occasional letters, then finally nothing at all. Clara became the friend they had once known, the girl who had gotten stuck in time, who had refused to move forward when the world demanded forward motion. Clara remained, tending to her small farmhouse, teaching elementary school during the week, and writing letters to a man the government had declared dead on Sunday mornings. Years folded into years like pages in a book no one else was reading. The war ended with parades and protests and political speeches, but for Clara the war continued every Sunday morning. The world moved on, found new tragedies to mourn, new heroes to celebrate. Clara wrote. She wrote through her 20s, when hope burned bright and fierce, when she still believed that any day might bring news of his return, of his escape, of his miraculous survival. She wrote through her 30s, when hope became a discipline, a choice she made each morning like choosing what dress to wear or what to make for breakfast. She wrote through her 40s and 50s, when hope transformed into something quieter but no less persistent, like the steady tick of the grandfather clock on her mantel or the reliable return of robins each spring, carrying promises of renewal in their bright red breasts. If you believe in true love, the kind that transcends time and distance and even death itself, let me know in the comments below. Because Clara's love was exactly that kind of love. By her 60th birthday, the ritual had become as natural as breathing. Sunday mornings were sacred. She would wake before dawn, make coffee in the same blue ceramic mug, and watch the sun rise over the cornfields while she composed her weekly letter. Her handwriting had grown shaky with arthritis, but her words remained steady. "My dearest Michael," she would always begin, "another week has passed, and I have so much to tell you." She wrote about the seasons, about the way the light fell across her kitchen floor in winter, about the mockingbird that built its nest in the oak tree where he had proposed. She wrote about the children she taught, about their laughter and their dreams. She wrote about the loneliness too, but gently, without complaint, as if she was simply reporting the weather. The letters went into the mailbox every Sunday afternoon. The mailman, first old Mr. Henderson, then his son Paul, then eventually Paul's daughter Sarah, collected them without comment. They knew where the letters were going, they knew they would never reach their destination. But they also knew that some rituals are too sacred to disturb. Clara never asked if the letters were delivered. She never asked for confirmation or proof. She simply trusted that love, real love, finds its way. The years carved lines around her eyes and silver through her hair. Her hands grew spotted with age, but they never stopped writing. She retired from teaching but continued her Sunday routine. The house grew quiet around her, but her heart remained full of words for Michael. She was 65 when her mother died, leaving her completely alone in the farmhouse where she had been born. She wrote to Michael about the funeral, about the weight of solitude, about how she sometimes heard his voice in the wind that moved through the corn. If you've ever waited for someone, if you know what it means to love beyond reason and logic, please like this video. Because waiting was Clara's gift to the world, proof that some loves are stronger than absence. At 70, her fingers could barely hold a pen, but she found ways to continue. She bought a typewriter at a garage sale, an old Royal Quiet Deluxe that belonged to a journalist's widow. The keys were stiff, but they gave voice to her devotion. Every Sunday, the small machine would clatter out another letter, another piece of her heart sent into the void. The townspeople had stopped talking about Clara's letters years ago. She had become part of the landscape, as reliable and unchanging as the grain elevator or the railroad crossing. Children grew up knowing about the old woman who wrote letters to a dead soldier. Some thought it was romantic, others thought it was tragic. Clara thought it was simply love. She was 75 when her health began to fail. Arthritis made typing difficult. Her eyes grew cloudy with cataracts, but she adapted, as she had adapted to everything else. She began dictating her letters to a small cassette recorder, then transcribing them slowly, word by word, her handwriting now barely legible but still carrying the weight of her heart. The house grew shabby around her, paint peeled from the shutters. The garden became overgrown, but every Sunday, without fail, a letter went into the mailbox. Even when she was sick with pneumonia, even when the snow was too deep for her to drive to town, even when her heart was so heavy with accumulated loneliness that she could barely lift her head. Her neighbors began checking on her more frequently. They brought groceries, helped with repairs, cleared her driveway after storms. They never mentioned the letters, but they understood in the way that small communities understand the sacred mysteries of their own people, that Clara's ritual was somehow keeping something important alive. October had always been Michael's favorite month. He loved the way the leaves caught fire before they died, loved the crisp promise of winter in the morning air. Clara felt closest to him in October, as if the thin membrane between the living and the lost grew even thinner when the world prepared to sleep. She was 86 that October morning when the knock came. Clara had been sitting at her kitchen table, struggling to write her weekly letter. Her hands shook so badly now that forming words was like trying to catch butterflies. She had managed only a few lines. "My dearest Michael, the leaves are turning again and I think of you with every golden branch." The knock was soft, almost hesitant. Clara rarely had visitors anymore. The mail carrier left packages on the porch. The grocery delivery boy honked and waved. But this was a knock that asked for something, that carried weight. She made her way slowly to the front door, her cane tapping against the hardwood floors that Michael had promised to refinish when he came home. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouette of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, holding something in his arms. When she opened the door, the October wind swept in, carrying the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke. The man standing on her porch was perhaps 45, with kind eyes and greying temples. In his arms he held a wooden box, old and weathered, the kind that might have held tools or memories or broken dreams. "Mrs. Whitmore?" His voice was gentle, careful. "My name is David Torres. I believe you knew my father." The world tilted. Clara gripped the doorframe, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Torres, Michael's name. But this man was too young, too solid, too real. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," David continued, "but I have something that belongs to you." He lifted the box slightly, and Clara saw that it was filled with envelopes, hundreds of them, all bearing her careful handwriting, all addressed to Michael Torres, all stamped and sealed and never delivered. "May I come in?" David asked. "There's a story you need to hear." Clara stepped aside, her legs trembling. David Torres followed her into the kitchen, where she had written thousands of letters, where she had loved a ghost for 43 years. He set the box carefully on the table, next to her half-finished letter, and Clara saw that each envelope in the box was marked with dates spanning decades. Her entire adult life reduced to a box of undelivered mail. "How?" she whispered. It was the only word she could manage. David pulled out a chair and sat across from her, the way Michael used to sit when they planned their future together. "My father didn't die in Vietnam, Mrs. Whitmore. He was captured, held prisoner for 7 years in conditions that, well, they broke something in his mind. When he finally came home, he couldn't remember who he had been before. He couldn't remember you." Clara's vision blurred. She pressed her hand to her mouth, afraid that if she opened it, 43 years of accumulated grief would pour out and drown them both. "The military forwarded your letters to him," David continued. "Every one of them. They arrived at the VA hospital where he lived for most of the 70s and 80s, but he couldn't understand why a stranger was writing to him about love and seasons and cornfields. The nurses put them in a box. They thought maybe someday his memory would return." "Did it?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. David's eyes filled with tears. "Pieces of it, near the end. He began remembering fragments. A girl with golden hair, a promise made under a tree, your name, spoken in dreams. He's dead now." It wasn't a question. 6 months ago, lung cancer, but Mrs. Whitmore... David reached into his jacket and pulled out a single envelope, this one addressed in a shaky male hand. "He wrote this before he died. For you." He remembered just enough to know that someone had been waiting. Clara took the envelope with trembling fingers. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she almost recognized, handwriting that had grown old just as hers had, but carried the ghost of the boy who had promised to love her forever. "Subscribe to this channel if you believe in miracles, in second chances, in love that survives even when memory fails, because what happened next was nothing short of miraculous." Clara opened the envelope slowly, afraid it might dissolve like a dream. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words written in pencil, some crossed out and rewritten as if each phrase had been fought for and won. "My Clara," it began, "I don't remember your face, but I remember your heart. I don't remember our promises, but I remember the feeling of forever. David tells me you never stopped writing. David tells me you waited. I don't deserve such love, but I am grateful beyond words that it existed. You made me real, even when I couldn't remember being real. Thank you for loving a ghost. Thank you for believing in what we had been. I am going to sleep now, but I am not afraid, because somewhere in dreams, I think I will find you again. Wait for me there. Your Michael." Clara read the letter 3 times before the words blurred beyond recognition. 43 years of questions answered in a handful of sentences. 43 years of faith finally rewarded. She looked up at David, this son she had never known existed, this living proof that Michael had indeed survived, had indeed loved someone enough to create life. "Tell me about him," she said. "Tell me about the man he became." David smiled, and in that smile, Clara saw an echo of the boy she had loved. He was quiet, gentle. He worked with his hands, fixing things that were broken. He never married, though I don't think he remembered why. But he was always searching for something, always looking at golden sunsets like they held a secret he couldn't quite recall. They talked until the sun set behind the cornfields, painting the kitchen in the same golden light that Michael had written about from a jungle halfway around the world. David told her about his father's life after the war, about the small apartment where he lived, about the way he would stare out the window for hours, as if waiting for something to arrive. "He kept your last letter," David said finally, pulling another envelope from his pocket. "The one you sent last Sunday. It reached him just after he died." Clara took this letter too, her final Sunday offering, stamped and processed and delivered at last. On the envelope, someone had written in pencil, "Recipient deceased, return to sender." But it had not been returned. It had been delivered to David instead, who had opened it and read her words about autumn leaves and faithful hearts and love that endures all things. It was that letter that had led him to her door, that had prompted him to load 43 years of undelivered mail into his truck and drive across 3 states to find the woman who had never stopped believing. As night fell, David helped Clara carry the box of letters to her living room. They sat together on the old couch where she had waited and hoped and written her way through nearly half a century of Sunday mornings. One by one, Clara lifted out the letters, her letters, recognizing her own handwriting at different ages, remembering the moments that had prompted each one. Here was the letter she had written after her mother's death. Here was the one from Christmas 1985, when she had described the snow falling on Michael's empty chair at her table. Here was the letter from her 50th birthday, when she had finally allowed herself to imagine growing old without him. Each envelope was a day of her life, a choice to love in the face of silence, a small act of faith that had accumulated into something magnificent and heartbreaking and beautiful. "What will you do with them?" David asked. Clara smiled, and for the first time in decades, it was a smile without sadness. "I think I'll donate them to the Veterans Museum in Des Moines. Let them be a testament to all the love that survives war, or the faith that outlasts logic. Let them prove that waiting is not wasted time, if it's done with love." David nodded. He would like that. "Yes," Clara agreed. "I think he would." 3 months later, Clara Whitmore quietly passed away in her sleep. She was found on a Sunday morning at her kitchen table with a pen in her hand and a fresh sheet of paper before her. The letter was brief but complete. "My dearest Michael, I am coming home. Wait for me." The people of the town came to her funeral, filling the small church where she had prayed for Michael's safe return every Sunday for 4 decades. David Torres spoke at the service, telling the gathered mourners about his father's life, about the love that had connected 3 strangers across time and distance and loss. "Love is not always about holding on," he said. "Sometimes it's about letting go. My father forgot many things, but he never forgot how to love. Clara never forgot how to hope. Together, they prove that some bonds are stronger than memory, stronger than death, stronger than time itself." The letters Clara had written were indeed donated to the Veterans Museum, where they became part of an exhibit called Love Letters to the Lost. Visitors come from around the world to read her words, to understand what it means to love without condition, to hope without guarantee. But perhaps the most remarkable thing happened the day after Clara's funeral. David Torres was cleaning out her house when he found her final letter, the one she had been writing when she died. Beside it, in a neat stack, were 43 fresh sheets of paper, enough for 1 more year of Sunday letters. On each sheet she had written only 2 words: "Thank you. Thank you for the love that sustained her. Thank you for the hope that defined her. Thank you for the proof that some promises, even broken ones, are kept in ways we never expect." The house where Clara and Michael had planned to build their life together was sold to a young couple with dreams of their own. They painted the shutters red, just as Michael had promised, and planted a garden where Clara had waited. The old oak tree still stands in the backyard, with initials carved deep in its bark, CW plus MT forever. And on Sunday mornings, when the light falls just right across the kitchen window, visitors to the Veterans Museum say they can almost hear the sound of typing, the whisper of pages turning, the quiet persistence of love that refuses to surrender. Clara Whitmore wrote 2,236 letters to a man who couldn't remember her name, but in the end, memory proved to be less important than love. In the end, the letters reached their destination after all. Not through the postal service, but through the simple miracle of a son who carried his father's heart home to the woman who had been guarding it for 43 years. This is what we learn from Clara, that love is not about being remembered. It's about choosing to remember. It's about writing letters to the silence and trusting that somewhere, somehow, love finds its way. Some stories end with reunion, some end with recognition. Clara's story ends with redemption, with the understanding that no love is ever wasted, No faith is ever foolish, no hope is ever lost. In a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, Clara Whitmore reminds us that some things are worth waiting for. Some people are worth remembering. Some loves are worth preserving, one letter at a time, one Sunday at a time, one heartbeat at a time. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, love knocks on our door with answers we never expected, carried by strangers who turn out to be exactly who we've been waiting for all along.